our travel quarantine for June will involve international travelers. So if you are an international traveler coming to the state of Nebraska, we're going to ask you to quarantine for 2 weeks, unless that travel was related to the military, or if it was in connection to travel for work for a healthcare facility. So with those two exceptions, if you're traveling internationally and you come back to Nebraska, or you originated from an international destination, came here, we want you to quarantine for 2 weeks. Well, obviously, what that does not include then is people traveling nationally. That also kind of begs the question then, what about Memorial Day weekend coming up here pretty fast? Again, when we put our travel quarantine in place, as I mentioned at the outset, that was really designed to catch people who were snowbirds, maybe coming from Arizona or Florida, and were coming back after having been gone, or people who maybe were out-of-state people coming to visit their cabin and so forth. It did not cover people, for example, who were truck drivers or things like that. People who commuted back and forth between, say, Council Bluffs and Omaha, or South Sioux City and Sioux City, or Cheyenne and Scotts Bluff, that sort of thing. Not intended to count those people. So we're not really putting anything in place here for domestic travel. And again, for Memorial Day weekend, if you are going out of state and you're coming back, if you're going to one of the surrounding states, you're going to Iowa, you're going to South Dakota, you're going to, Missouri, something like that, you don't have to worry about quarantine when you come back to the state. We're really worried about people who don't, use good judgment. Don't go to places like New Jersey, where they've still got lots of spread there. But if you're just going to someplace, use good judgment, take all the proper steps to be able to socially distance yourself. When you come back to Nebraska, you don't have to quarantine if you're just going away for the weekend over Memorial Day. Okay, so hopefully that kind of gives an idea of what we're talking about for travel. Sports. We'd already given some guidance with regard to baseball and softball for on May 11th with regard to how those could go. And our DHM will include team sports, and we've actually categorized them by contact level. And we've used the American Academy of Pediatrics. They published a document that had contact sports in it, whether it was non-contact, limited contact, and so forth. And we're really looking at the categories for non-contact and limited contact. Now, that document itself was about physical contact between players or the ground or water or something like that. So it's just a guidance document for us, but it's a good guidance document that we will get out to folks. But it includes categories of sports that will be available, not only baseball and softball we talked about, but tennis and golf. Rodeo will be in that because in the American Academy of Pediatrics, rodeo is a contact sport, but you're contacting the ground, so we're not worried about contact with the ground, it's really contact with other people. So that will be in that category of sports that will be allowed to do, again, following all the same guidelines we already published for baseball and softball. Rodeo will come under the gatherings category, which we'll talk about in a minute as far as how many people can come to see them. But again, for these other sports, following the May guideline, and we'll get that published out to people. So that's how we're going to handle sports. Some sports are going to continue to be prohibited, and those are going to be those contact sports like football or wrestling. And I think we can all kind of see why those get put in that category of being put in. Volleyball would be in that category of games that may be part of those limited contact sports. So again, the idea is practice can start June 1st for those sports. Games can start June 18th. So that should be good news. Okay. This will also include, this will be for both youth and adults. So youth and adults will be able to start practice that June 1st in those non-contact or limited contact sports. Competitions June 18th. Contact sports, again, football, tackle football, soccer, wrestling, basketball, those will continue to remain prohibited. School gyms and weight rooms are permitted to be open following the same guidelines as healthcare, fitness clubs, fitness centers, health clubs, spas, that sort of thing. And we'll have, I'll have a little bit more on that here in a moment as well. All right. So starting June 1st, the following guidelines will apply to 89 of our counties. So the ones I just talked about, the sports and the travel, that was statewide. These are now going to be specifically for those 89 counties that we had previously relaxed restrictions on in May, and now we're going to be moving from that phase 1 to a phase 2, okay? So again, we're looking at our little map here, right? So all the dark blue are those counties that are, those 89 counties I talked about, that are now moving from phase 1 to phase 2. So we're going to loosen restrictions in these blue counties. The 2 health districts, Central Health District and Dakota, are going to be moving to phase 1 where everybody else was in May. So they will have restrictions loosened in line with what we're already currently doing in just about every place else in the rest of the state. So the green will be phase 1, which is what we're in right now. That will be, again, 10-person rule with regard to gatherings, restaurants open at 50% capacity, but not bars. So that'll be the green. And the blue will be phase 2, which will be the rules that I'll be going over right now. Okay? So, bars. Bars, bottle clubs, gentlemen clubs, and so forth will be able to reopen basically under the same rules that apply to restaurants. They'll have to be at 25 people or 50% of the rated occupancy. Same rules as far as 6 feet separation between tables. Patrons will have to be seated at tables. You will not be able to consume food at the bar seating area. Again, servers wearing masks and all that sort of thing are going to be part of our guidance documents that we'll also put out. But again, we're trying to keep, in 6 feet of separation between entertainers, performers, dancers, and then the patrons. So again, keeping that social distancing of 6 feet and a maximum of 6 people at a table. So again, like restaurants where we're saying parties can only be at 6, tables can only be 6, same thing for bars. Patrons seated at a table, maximum of 6 feet, or 6 feet between tables and a maximum of 6 feet at the bar table. Games such as pool, darts, arcade games, and so forth are still going to be prohibited both in restaurants and bars. Gatherings. So we're going to be loosening restrictions on gatherings. Now, gatherings in June will be limited to 25 people, or, so there's going to be several categories. For certain venues, 25% of your rated occupancy, but not to exceed 3,000 people. So the kinds of gatherings we're talking about for this are going to be outdoor arenas, indoor and outdoor auctions, stadiums, tracks, fairgrounds, festivals, zoos, auditoriums, large event conference rooms, meeting halls, indoor theaters, libraries, swimming pools, and any other sort of confined indoor-outdoor space. So again, all these places have rated occupancies. You can have a maximum of either the greater of either 25 people or 25% of your rated occupancy. But same sort of rules we just talked about for bars and restaurants. You have to limit groups to be no longer larger than 6 people. You got to have 6 feet of separating out between people, and so forth. The types of events or venues that will continue to be banned or prohibited will be parades, carnivals, midways, dances and street dances, beer gardens. They'll continue to be prohibited through June 30th, with the exception of parades, as long as the patrons all remain in their vehicles. So you can still do a public parade like we've been doing for some of the schools, where everybody gets in the car and drives by somebody's house. As long as people aren't lining the street, that's going to be fine. And then also dance recitals. So again, dances are not dance recitals. Dance recitals will be allowed under the same rules of 25 people or 25% of your rated occupancy for that venue. Drive-in movie theaters may be open at full capacity as long as patrons remaining in their vehicles or on their cars while viewing the movie theater. And congregant concessions and restrooms are not permitted. So now, if you are going to have a venue that is going to have more than 500 people, even with that 25% restriction on your occupancy rating, you have to submit a plan to your local public health department, with the exception of being counties that have more than 500,000 people. That limit will be 1,000 people. So basically, in Douglas County, if you're going to have a venue that's got more than 1,000 people, you're going to event more than 1,000 people coming, you got to submit a plan to Dr. Poor, and she's got to sign off on it. Everywhere else in the state, that limit is 500 people, and you got to, same thing, you got to submit that plan to your local public health director, and that person has got to sign off on that plan. Now, I mentioned how school gyms can operate like other gyms, fitness centers, clubs, health clubs, and so forth. They will be able to open up to the greater of 25 people, excluding staff, or 50% of the rated occupancy. So 25 people or 50% of their rated occupancy. But again, same sort of rules that we talked about before. You know, when you've got that gym equipment in there, it's got to be 6 feet apart, all the same sanitation kind of things, all those similar rules we talked about before. Salons, barbershop, massage therapy, tattoo parlors, and those sort of things will be, again, limited to 25 people, excluding staff, or 50% of their rated occupancy. So same sort of deal that we just talked about for gyms, for those salons. If they've got more square feet, they can do it to 50% of the rated occupancy. But again, chairs and stations got to be 6 feet apart. Patrons and workers are still required in the DHM to wear masks at all times. An exception, though, will be made for services provided by estheticians. Patrons will be permitted to remove their mask while receiving services directly. Masks must be worn by the patron at all other times, and of course, the person providing that service, the esthetician, still has to be wearing a mask. So this is, again, if you want to get that facial, you'll be able to do that. But again, you can take your mask off to be able to get the facial, but only so long as you're getting the facial. Other times you'll have to have your mask on, and of course, the person providing that will still have to be wearing a mask at all times. We also asked a lot about wedding and funeral reception venues. So these will be in that same category of limited to 25 people, excluding staff, or 50% of their rated occupancy, the greater of one of those two, 50% of their rated occupancy. Again, same idea, groups of 6 people seated at a table, 6 feet between each table, maximums there. Self-serve, just like for restaurants, you can't have self-serve buffets or salad bars. All the food will have to be served by venue staff. And no dances. So no wedding dances or other social events that require guests to gather outside of their respective tables are permitted. So again, this will be something where everybody's going to, if you're going to go have a wedding reception, people will have to remain at their tables, again, to preserve that good social distancing. So wedding reception venues will be able to open at that 50% of their rated capacity, or 25 people, whichever is greater, but follow the same types of rules that we already have established for restaurants. So those are, that is what we will do. We will, again, have, as we've said before, 19 DHMs, one for each of the different public health districts, but for, 17 of them, they're going to look like what I just talked about. The 2 that I didn't mention will be under that, so this is kind of our phase 2 step. The 2 that are not in this will be in the phase 1, which will look like what everybody else is in right now here in the month of May, and that will be for Central and Dakota.